Welcome to all our listeners. My name is Auren Israel and I am the chairman of Auren Israel, the leading international consulting firm in Israel. Auren Israel is part of an international network of offices operating in more than 70 countries and over 300 branches worldwide. As part of our podcast channel, we are excited to share with you the special podcast season which focuses on life science and their business application. We will host here key people who will share with us their point of view about research, academia, application and business in the fields of science. Along with me is Mr. Amir Kahani, the managing partner of the VSO Consultant Division at Auren Israel. Shalom, Amir.
Good morning and shalom to everybody.
Amir, today we are going to speak about conscious capitalism. In Hebrew, it's capitalism kashuv. And together with us is one of the leading key people in developing this mythology, Mr. Timothy Henry. Hello, Timothy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today.
Great having you here, and looking forward to hear your explanation and experience in this interesting field of conscious capitalism. Timothy, could you give us a little short brief about your life experience, academia experience, and business experience, and how you are coming to this world of conscious capitalism?
Sure. Very briefly, I have been a management consultant or coach or leadership developer in some shape or form for almost 35 years. I graduated from Oxford University in the mid-'80s and joined a large consulting firm. Spent 9 years there as a principal doing strategy work, really around the world, 4 years in Japan, 4 years in New York, a year in London. And after that, spending a lot of time working on strategy, I got very interested in the whole issue of strategy execution. And I was fortunate enough to be recruited by Dave Norton and Bob Kaplan, who were just starting something called a balanced scorecard focused on strategy execution. So I was really fortunate in beginning my career with both strategy work and then strategy execution work. And then I like to say I then became a reformed strategist in the second half of my career as I got more involved with culture change and organizational development work, because I felt that that was really critical to the execution of strategy and then ultimately into leadership development, because without leaders, it's really hard to change organizations. And most recently was co-CEO of a boutique, a leadership development company based in London. Along the route, about 12, 13 years ago, actually February of 2008, I was invited by my co-author Raj Sisodia to go to a retreat at John Mackey's home in Texas. Now, John Mackey is the founder and CEO of the largest organic grocery store in the world, Whole Foods, which was bought in 2017 by Amazon for $13 billion, just to give you a sense of how large that is. And at that retreat, we had a number of CEOs from different organizations, and a lot of them are names you've heard: Patagonia, Costco, Southwest Airlines, the Container Store. And a lot of the discussion was about why these companies are the most profitable in their businesses and yet have a very distinct way of doing business. And from that, we launched the conscious capitalism movement. And since then, I co-authored with Raj Sisodia a book on conscious capitalism, the field guide, with Thomas Eckschmidt as our third author on that. And I've been out trying to propagate that idea and help people find practical ways to apply it since then.
Well, sounds interesting and quite a lot of practical experiences, I understand, that you have. Timothy, so let's dive into the first definition and please enlighten us about what is conscious capitalism.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that there's the word capitalism in here. And That's very important because first and foremost, we're strong capitalists. We believe in capitalism and business as having the potential to have the greatest impact on our society. In fact, we often begin these discussions by saying, if you actually looked at the world over the last 2,000 years, you would see that up until about 1750, so for the first 1700 years of what's sometimes referred to as the New Era, you would see that the worldwide GDP had remained relatively flat at around 500 US dollars per capita for almost 1700 years. And then in 1750, and the 1750s, 60s, 70s, something happened, which was really the Industrial Revolution. And if you look and you see GDP per capita since then, in terms of the increase in size, it went from about 500 to about 8,000 over that period of time. So the question is, what happened? Well, we would say what happened was business began to form and get to a size and scale where it really began to make a real difference in the world. And so in that sense, we're believers in business and believers in capitalism. Now, having said that, capitalism is not without its critics. And I often find it amusing that when I'm talking in the US and I talk about conscious capitalism, people will turn to me and they'll say, okay, we get the capitalism part. Explain to us this consciousness thing. What are you talking about? And sometimes when I'm presenting in Europe, what happens is quite the opposite. People say, okay, we get the consciousness thing. Tell us about this capitalism stuff. What's that all about?
Okay.
But we're, first and foremost, we are capitalists. We believe in the power of business. Now, the flip side of that is right now, business has sort of an existential PR crisis because there's a group called Edelman Research, which does an annual survey of trust. And the level of trust in big business up until 2020 has never been lower. It's been on a steady decline for the last 30 years, every year getting lower and lower, down to around 19% of people would say they had trust in big business to solve society's problems in 2020. The only group that scored lower on that, certainly in the US, was the US Congress. And that's not much when you're competing with US Congress for the lowest level of trust in the US, then you have a challenge. And so the interesting question is, why has confidence in business declined so much? What is that all about? And we would argue that what has happened is that business itself has gotten a bad rep. It has become a place where people think it's all about greed, it's all about money, and they've lost track of the narrative that said that isn't always been the case. In fact, if you go back to the very first companies that were formed, they were formed in England and in Holland, and each business that was formed had a charter. It had a charter that said, this is why this business exists. And when you go back and you look at those charters, they were not just about making money. They were about doing something. They were about increasing trade. They were about developing local economies. There were a lot of things, and the idea of maximizing profit was not first and foremost in those early charters. So today we have, an image. If you think about a lot of movies where business people show up, they almost always show up as the greedy bad guys. So there's something that's happened in our society where people have often looked at business as being all about selfishness, all about greed. And we think that, in fact, the most profitable companies in many of the sectors that we work in are actually companies that take a very different view of what's the role of business. And that's where we begin the story of what is conscious capitalism.
But Timothy, may I ask you one thing? You describe the fundamental topics that bring you and your colleague to create this movement. But let me remind you and to the audience that Professor Milton Friedman defined the purpose of the company to increase the value to its shareholders. And I think that in the last 20 or 25 years, or maybe more, this, let's call it brutal and aggressive capitalism that focusing on only bringing more money to the shareholder become to be part of the DNA of the society. Now, what you said is let's change, or let's coming back to the fundamental topics about why the company has established. Now, I quite agree with you, because as one that I have created a unique business methodology called value selling organization that combine the Taoism way of thinking and the holistic approach, and attached to our clients' client needs. I really agree with you. But how do you think that can be changed the internal DNA of the business world?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question to be asking, because let me be really clear, really in favor of profit. Profit is a good thing. So we are not by any means saying that profit's a bad thing. What we're saying is that profit is an outcome. Profit is an end game that results from the things that you do in your business. And what we would like to argue, and which we think there's enough data to support, says that how you make that profit matters. And if you want to create a long-term sustainable business model that does deliver significant levels of profit, then the best way of doing that is to focus on some of the what we call the 4 tenets of conscious capitalism, and that's just a better way of doing business. So, for example, when we talk about companies in the airline industry in the US. Now, the airline industry in the US is notorious for being a very cyclical business. But until this year, and obviously or last year for obvious reasons, Southwest Airlines had 25 straight years of profit increase. And over the course of that 25 years had made more money than all the rest of the US airlines put together. So the interesting question is, what was Southwest Airlines doing differently that allowed them to be so incredibly profitable in an industry that is notorious for its up and down nature of the profits? And they would argue that it's about how they run their business in terms of the culture and leadership of the business, and that they have just a very unique and different point of view, very focused on purpose, very focused on creating a great culture, and that's what underpins their ability to create significant profit consistently over time. So, in some sense, what Milton Friedman said is true, but it just wasn't complete. And what people have mistaken is that profit should be the reason behind why business exists, rather than understanding that it's an outcome from businesses operating extraordinarily well.
So you have mentioned these companies that make an extremely unbelievable results, but as an ambassador of consciousness capitalism in Israel, I'm a little bit familiar with the methodology. But for the audience sake, can you please share with us the 4 pillars that this methodology stand on?
Yes, of course. So one of the things we did was, when we had this group of CEOs together, and over the course of the first few years, we began asking ourselves, what were the core elements that these businesses had in common that we thought really could be translated into a set of things that other business leaders could follow. So we came up with 4 basic tenets. And I might add a 5th that we're thinking about as we get into this discussion. But the 4 basic core tenets. The first one was purpose, that a business has a purpose that goes beyond just making money. So that if you thought of any entrepreneur that started their business, they had a problem they were trying to solve. They had a passion about that problem. So, for example, somebody like Bill Gates didn't set out to be at that time, one of the richest men in the world. What he set out to do was to liberate computing power. So he had a vision, and his vision was, could we put computing on the desktops of people and move it away from these gigantic rooms where only a few people had access? So he had a vision and a purpose for why he founded Microsoft. And the money came, but the purpose was around liberating computing power and putting a desktop, which is now a common word, but back then was really an unusual idea. So the first idea is purpose, and that a business exists for that purpose and it goes beyond just making money. The second is having what we call a stakeholder orientation rather than just a focus on shareholders. So this goes to the heart of your earlier question. So imagine for a moment if you have a business where you're not focused on your stakeholders very well. So for example, your employees hate working there. Your customers really don't like interacting with you. The communities that you work in don't like having you there, and you have a really poor record in the environment, and you're getting a lot of bad PR about that, and your business partners dread working with you. If those things were true, do you think you'd be delivering a lot of profit to your shareholders? Well, it's sort of a leading question because the answer is, of course not. So if you really wanted a great business, you'd want your employees to be really happy working there. You'd want your customers to be raving fans. You'd want your suppliers to be working with you closely to innovate and take costs out of the business. You would hope the communities love having you there, and you'd have a very good reputation in the business world for being a responsible citizen. If those things were true, do you think you'd make more money? Probably. So we believe this orientation towards stakeholders and looking at how you optimize the value creation in the ecosystem that you're a part of is really the key to long-term sustainable profitability. Then the third element is around culture. So we believe that great places to work deliver great results. And there's a lot of empirical evidence to demonstrate that. The Great Place to Work Institute in the US has been working with Fortune magazine for almost 25 years around publishing their 100 best places to work in America. And they do that every year. And what's often overlooked is they always put a chart in there that says, you know, if you had invested in the companies that are on our 100 best places to work list, how would they do versus the S&P 500 or the Russell 2000 index of companies in the US? And the number has, generally fluctuated between 4 and 5 times better. That's 4 or 5 times better, not just a little percentage point here and there, but significantly better performance by these companies in terms of their stock prices. So again, it demonstrates that this thing called culture really can be an incredible enabler of better profitability. And then fourth, the issue is leadership. People often ask me, what's the most important thing in being a conscious capitalist company? And I say, well, it's 3 things. It's really clear. It's leadership, and it's leadership. Because without strong leadership, without good leadership, you're not going to have any of these other things happen. But it's not just any kind of leadership. It's what we call conscious leadership. And by that, we mean an orientation that's more around service to others and helping others and being less an ego-driven, traditional, strong male, alpha, follow me, do it my way or the highway kind of thing, but rather someone who is what we would call more emotionally intelligent, who's able to create psychological safety in the business teams that they work with, and who is seen as someone who has the best interests of the business first, and it's not all about their ego-driven needs for power. So we say when you put those 4 things together, you in fact create the conditions for a good business to actually become a great business. And the result of that is inevitably higher profits.
Yes, it sounds like this, and it was very interesting what you have said because my personal background is being in the sales arena for more than 20 years. And today, when I created the VSO methodology, I said I replaced the word salesman to the new business maker.
Hmm.
And those leadership, the salesperson is also need to be in the same shape. How can I help you, my clients, to achieve your business goal in front of your clients,
Yeah.
meaning your clients? But you know,
Well, actually, that's a brilliant point, isn't it? I mean, it really is. I mean, I'm not trying to sell you a product. I'm trying to sell you a solution.
yes,
I'm not just trying to push something on you. I'm asking, what is the problem you have, and can I help solve it?
yes, and more. If you take it one step forward, and I'm willing to share it with you later on, it's I'm not selling you my solution or product. I'm selling you the value that I can bring to you to your business. But I would like to take you to be more accurate or more specific. For example, if I was your client and I am the VP of sales, not marketing, but sales, and I highlight the word sales because we are very aggressive in the sales arena, what is the best advice from the leadership point of view that you can give me in order to motivate my sales department?
Well, one way in which I approach this is to sort of say, we live in a world where things are changing very, very quickly. And even in sales, the sales environment, new competitors, new demands are going to be coming at us increasingly quickly. And so if you're a VP of sales, in any business right now, if you look out to June or July of 2021, and I ask you, can you predict what the business environment's going to be looking like in the next 6 months? Probably your crystal ball and my crystal ball, they're all a little cloudy right now. And it's an extreme in 2021. But it makes the point that in a world in which things are very uncertain and unclear, the ability to have a team that can follow you, that can change quickly and adapt quickly to a changing business environment is key. And maybe no more so than in sales, because you're really on the cutting edge of the business environment. Whatever is happening in the business environment today, you're feeling it because you're getting feedback from the customers and clients every day. And so the first thing I say is, I really ask, well, so tell me, what's the level of trust and what's the level of engagement in your organization? And I touch on those two because when you step back and you sort of ask yourself, if people are willing to change quickly, if they're willing to stretch themselves, are they going to do that in a low trust business environment? Are they going to do that in a organization where people are not very engaged? And I think the answer is pretty clearly no. So things like trust and engagement and building those as a leader inside your organization become critical, because if you want people to react quickly to changing environments, if you want people to be innovative and creative, if you want people to go that extra mile for you, then they've got to have at a base level a certain degree of trust and a certain degree of engagement in what you're trying to do. So at the core of this is high trust, high engagement. And are you creating that kind of environment as a VP of sales? Now, underneath that, the next question is, when are your people at their best? And what are those conditions that create people being at their best? And beyond trust and engagement, I might argue that it's actually a pretty common thing. It doesn't mean whether you're VP of sales or VP of R&D or of operations. In the end, there's a very basic human need we all have, which is to feel that the people we work with care about us and that the work we do has meaning. So I would argue that the role of any leader, and that includes the VP of sales, is to create an environment where people feel that they're cared for and that the work they have is meaningful. And that in thus doing, you also then create a high trust and a high engagement culture. And if you do that, that will result in your organization being an extremely powerful, fast adapting, quick executing place to work.
Lovely. And may I ask you, what is your own purpose, you as a person in your own company?
My purpose is pretty clear. I want to help create and catalyze leaders and organizations that are as human as the people who work in them.
Lovely. So before we will pass to our next chapter, I would like to ask you for the last question for this episode. Uh, as a regular businessman, can you guide me where I can start looking for information about the consciousness capitalism? What should I do? With whom should I contact with?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a couple of different ways to get more familiar with this. One is obviously to read the book, The Conscious Capitalism Field Guide, which I co-authored and is published by Harvard Business Press. I think that gives you a good overview of the concepts. At the beginning of each section, we give a sort of a brief summary of each of the concepts, and then we give some basic exercises to work through with you and your team to sort of get a sense of where you might be. So I think it's always useful for a CEO or a senior leader to take that book and at least do the mental experiment of asking themselves, how might my team do this? And that helps ground you in the concepts. The second thing is consciouscapitalism.org is the organization that's been set up basically based in the US to try to propagate these ideas. So there is, or has been typically, a CEO summit in the fall of each year. And there's plans for there to be one right now in 2021. And that's always a great opportunity for CEOs to gather from around the world to get exposed for 3.5 days to these ideas. And when you get exposed to these ideas, you hear a lot of speakers, you get other CEOs that are also trying to be on this journey. And I think that's extraordinarily important. And then finally, you can always reach out to me and I'll have a conversation with me if you're interested. And I can be reached at, I think you guys will put out an email that will have my address on it. That's thenry@arete, ARETE-MGT.com. So those are the three ways that I would think would be a good way to begin this conversation and begin to think about where you might begin the journey for your business.
Great, Timothy. I think that all the contacts and material that you just mentioned, we will put on our website, and of course, it will be accompanied by the podcast in a written manner. But basically, I would like to invite our listeners to the second chapter, because this part was very interesting for me. I think the mythology and your explanation is quite interesting, and I'm looking forward to hear you on our second chapter regarding all kind of examples of practical implementation that you had in your experience. So I want again to thank you very much, Timothy Henry.
Thank you.
For this first chapter, and also to my colleague Amir Kahani from Auren VSO Consultancy, and all our listeners. We will be happy if you will join us for the second chapter. Thank you very much.